In a world where faith reached for the heavens, men gave their lives to build monuments that touched the sky. Their hands bled, their backs broke, and their names were forgotten beneath the very stones they raised. Tonight we journey into that forgotten world, the world of the cathedral builders. If you enjoy falling asleep to the echoes of the past, remember to follow the channel. It helps us keep the fire burning and bring more forgotten histories to life. Now, close your eyes, take a slow breath, and imagine the sound of hammers striking stone in the mist of the Middle Ages. In the heart of medieval Europe, long before machines or engines, there rose a dream carved from stone. It was not born from gold or conquest, but from faith, a faith so deep it reached toward the heavens themselves. In quiet villages and growing towns, men looked to the sky and imagined a house for God so grand that it might touch eternity. Cathedrals were not just buildings. They were prayers made visible. Each stone, each arch, each tower was a whisper of devotion, a human hand trying to grasp something divine. But behind that dream lay a story not of glory, but of exhaustion, dust, and sacrifice. The cathedrals that still stand today, their spires piercing clouds, their stained glass shimmering with color, were born from centuries of labor. They were raised by men who would never see them finished. For them, heaven was not in the afterlife, but in the small hope that their work, their sweat, might one day stand as proof that they existed. Imagine a morning in the 12th century. The air is cold, the fields are quiet, and in the distance, you hear the dull rhythm of hammers striking stone. Dust rises in the pale light as scaffolds stretch high above muddy streets. This is not a grand construction site as we know today. No engines, no cranes, no noise but that of muscle, wood, and will. Hundreds of men gather. Masons, carpenters, blacksmiths, laborers, each one a small part of something far greater than himself. To build a cathedral was to dedicate your life to something you would never complete. A lifetime of lifting, carving, hauling, and yet only a few feet higher by the time your own life ended. And still they believed. They believed that by shaping stone they might shape their souls. The act of work itself was worship. When the priest blessed the foundation stone, the crowd wept. For in that moment, it felt as though heaven had come a little closer to the earth. Cathedrals were built not just to glorify God, but to command awe. In an age of darkness and fear, these massive structures reminded people of something eternal, something beyond plague, famine, or war. They were the heart of a community, pulsing with life, faith, and ambition. The higher the walls climbed, the greater the pride. And yet, with every stone laid, the burden grew heavier for those who carried it. The dream of heaven on earth came with a price. The men who labored on these cathedrals did not live lives of holiness or comfort. Most were poor, uneducated, and bound to their craft by necessity rather than choice. They worked for bread and belief. For every beautiful arch we see today, there are 1,000 broken backs behind it. For every glowing window that colors a modern tourist's gaze, there are countless hands that bled to polish its frame. Still the dream endured. Generation after generation, fathers handed their tools to sons, telling them to continue the work. The building was never theirs to finish. It belonged to time itself. Some towns took 200 years to raise their cathedrals. By the time the final bell tower touched the sky, no one alive remembered the first stone being laid. And yet, The spirit of those long-dead builders lived on in the walls, their fingerprints hidden beneath plaster, their sighs trapped in the mortar, their dreams echoing in the vaulted ceilings. When you step inside a medieval cathedral, even now you feel it, that strange, quiet weight. It is the presence of human devotion carved into silence. It humbles you not because of its beauty, but because of its cost. Each stone was a choice between faith and fatigue. Each sculpture, a cry of hope from hands that trembled. The dream of heaven on earth was both divine and cruel. It lifted men's hearts, but crushed their bodies. It gave meaning to their suffering, but demanded everything in return. And so, as the sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting the floor in colors of paradise, the builders below wiped the sweat from their eyes, unaware that they had already built something far greater than heaven itself. They had built endurance. They had built faith into stone. The story of a cathedral was never the story of a single lifetime. It was the story of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of lives, woven together by time, duty, and belief. From the first stone laid to the last spire crowned with gold, a cathedral could take not just decades, but centuries to complete. To be born in its shadow meant to live your whole life beneath the sound of chisels and hammers, and still die knowing it would never be finished. For most, the cathedral was less a building and more a companion, a constant presence that grew slowly, stubbornly, like a mountain of faith in the middle of their town. When a child was born, the walls might reach only the height of a man. When that child became old and gray, the same walls might have climbed a little higher, the roof still open to the sky. And when his children took his place, they would stand in the same square, hearing the same echoes of labor, continuing what their fathers began. The work was endless, not because men were lazy or careless, but because what they were trying to build defied their time. The cathedrals were dreams carved against the limits of mortality. Stone by stone, they reached upward, fighting gravity and the fragility of human life. Each generation passed its burden to the next. Each mason learned his trade from the hands of his father, inheriting both the craft and the weariness that came with it. The tools barely changed. The rhythm of work, the lift of the hammer, the scrape of the chisel, echoed through the centuries like a heartbeat. There were years when construction stopped altogether. Wars erupted. Famine spread. Money vanished. And yet, even when the scaffolds rotted and the stones were covered in moss, the people still believed that one day, the work would begin again. To them, the cathedral was not abandoned. It was only sleeping. Faith would wake it when the world was ready. Imagine standing in a town square in the year 1240. You look up, and the half-built skeleton of the cathedral rises above you, its ribs of stone exposed, its towers incomplete. Generations before you stood in the same place, watching the same scene, their eyes full of hope. Now the faces have changed, but the dream remains. Children chase each other between piles of timber and blocks of limestone. The air smells of dust and fire, and the songs of the workers echo through the alleys like prayers. Their voices mix with the bells that ring across the valley, a reminder that the sacred and the earthly are always bound together. For the master builders, the maîtres d'œuvre, time was both an enemy and a friend. They knew that they would never see the cathedral finished, yet their names would live on in its walls. Their drawings, scratched onto parchment, guided men who would not even be born for another 100 years. The design of a cathedral was a conversation between generations, a message passed hand to hand, carried through centuries of silence. Every alteration, every unfinished arch, every addition of a new tower told the story of changing times, new rulers, new faiths, new fears. And so, a cathedral could begin in the language of one century and end in another's tongue. Styles shifted. Romanesque became Gothic. Arches grew higher, windows wider. But the foundation remained, steady and patient, as if the earth itself agreed to hold this human dream. To walk through a completed cathedral was to walk through time. Each wall, each stone belonged to a different generation. It was not one building. It was many, layered like the rings of a tree. The people who built them never called themselves artists or visionaries. They were simply workers, surviving from one season to the next. But their endurance turned into beauty. Their patience became prayer. And though none of them could imagine the full glory of what they were creating, their faith carried it forward, invisible but unbroken. There is a quiet tragedy in that. To devote your entire life to something you will never see complete. To wake every morning knowing that your labor adds only a fragment to an endless whole. But perhaps that is what made the work sacred. Because the builders understood something most of us forget. That meaning does not always come from finishing, but from continuing. The cathedral itself was proof of persistence. Its endless construction mirrored the endless striving of the soul. Even now, when we stand beneath those stone vaults and look upward, we feel the weight of those centuries. The stones are old, but they are alive with memory. You can almost hear the echoes of the hammers, the distant songs of the workers fading into time. And if you listen closely, beneath the silence of the church, you might still hear the unfinished rhythm of their labor. The whisper of an eternal project that was never meant to end. For that was the truth of every cathedral. It was never about completion. It was about devotion. A promise passed from one pair of hands to another. A monument to the belief that some dreams are too vast to belong to a single lifetime. And so the builders came and went, nameless, tireless, faithful. Until at last, centuries later, their dream finally touched the sky. To understand the cathedrals, you must first understand the hands that built them. They were not saints or scholars. They were men of mud and muscle, men whose backs bore the memory of hunger and whose hands were calloused from years of labor. They came from villages scattered across the countryside, drawn not by wealth, but by something harder to name. A promise of belonging, a purpose carved in stone. Most of them were peasants. Born to the soil, they had lived their lives bound to the land, tilling fields that were never truly theirs, working from dawn to dusk under the rule of lords who would never know their names. But when a new cathedral began to rise, it changed everything. The word spread like rumor and fire. The bishop is building. And for the first time there was work, not in the fields but on something grand, something eternal. Men left their farms behind and followed the sound of hammers to the growing towns, hoping that a place in the worksite meant a place in history. At the bottom of the scaffolds were the laborers, the unskilled workers who carried stone, mixed mortar, and hauled timber. Their work was brutal. They rose before the sun and toiled until it disappeared behind the towers. Their feet sank in mud. Their clothes were soaked with sweat. And in winter, when the wind tore through the unfinished walls, they wrapped themselves in rags and kept working. They were paid little, barely enough to feed a family, but it was still more than the uncertain life of the fields could offer. Above them, the stonemasons shaped the cathedral's bones. These were craftsmen, respected but rarely rich. Their hands were steady, their eyes trained to see both strength and beauty in a block of rock. Each chisel stroke was a small act of creation, part art, part endurance. They learned through apprenticeship, spending years as assistants before being trusted with even a single decorative carving. A mistake could ruin months of labor, and so precision became their faith. They spoke a language of lines and angles, of pressure and patience. Their tools were few, but their mastery made them feel infinite. There were carpenters too, who built the wooden frames and scaffolds, invisible skeletons that held the dream upright until the stone could stand on its own. And there were blacksmiths, their forges glowing through the night, crafting nails, hinges, and the iron that bound the whole thing together. Even glassmakers came, summoned to shape the sunlight itself, turning sand and ash into color, into visions of saints that would one day glow above the altar like fragments of heaven. But most of all, there were the nameless ones. The men who carried, lifted, and died without leaving a mark. No inscription remembers them. No record tells their story. Yet they were the cathedral's true foundation. Every stone they raised was a heartbeat of devotion, every scar on their skin a verse in an unwritten prayer. It was dangerous work. Scaffolds broke, ropes snapped, stones slipped from trembling hands. A single mistake could send a man falling to his death, his body buried in the same earth where the cathedral's roots took hold. In some towns, there were small cemeteries beside the construction site, graves for those who built the house of God but never stepped inside it. The bells that tolled for the faithful also tolled for the fallen. And yet, despite the hardship, there was pride. To work on a cathedral was to touch something divine. The laborers knew that their names would not be carved on any wall, but their work would last long after their bones had turned to dust. In an age when life was short and the future uncertain, that was enough. To build meant to leave a trace. To endure meant to be remembered. At the end of each day, when the sun sank low and the bells rang across the valley, the workers gathered around small fires near the site. They shared bread, stories, and the warmth of tired laughter. Some sang songs of faith, of home, of loss. Others sat in silence, staring at the great unfinished silhouette that towered over them. It was a sight both humbling and holy. They had given everything they had to something far greater than themselves. And in return, the cathedral gave them meaning. There were women too, though history rarely remembers them. They carried water, tended to the sick, cooked for the workers, sometimes helped in shaping clay or lifting wood. In the villages surrounding the worksite, they raised children who would one day take their fathers' places on the scaffolds. The cathedral consumed generations, and generations fed it back. For the medieval laborer, life was harsh and brief. Many never lived past 40. Their bodies broke before their spirits did. But to them, suffering was not meaningless. It was part of the divine order, the price of creation, the echo of sacrifice. They believed that each stone raised brought them closer to God, and that the pain of their hands was a form of prayer. And perhaps in some quiet way it was. Because even now, when we stand beneath the arches of those cathedrals, we feel their presence. The stonemasons, the carpenters, the forgotten men and women, all of them still there, hidden within the walls. Their work hums in the silence, their sweat turned to beauty, their suffering transfigured into light. The medieval laborers never saw the cathedrals completed, but through their endurance, they taught the world something eternal. That greatness is not born from glory, but from persistence, and that even the smallest hand, guided by faith, can lift a dream that touches the heavens. In the shadow of every cathedral stood another kind of structure, unseen, silent, yet every bit as complex as the towers themselves. It was the world of the guilds, a world of rules, oaths, and invisible hierarchies that shaped the very soul of medieval craftsmanship. To the ordinary villager, a guild was a mystery. Its members spoke in whispers, carried secret marks, and seemed to possess knowledge that bordered on the divine. They were the master builders, men who knew how to bend stone to their will, how to draw heaven on parchment, and how to keep that knowledge guarded with a jealous devotion. The guild was both a brotherhood and a fortress, a place where skill was currency and ignorance was exile. For a young boy, joining a guild was the closest thing to escaping the fate of his birth. Perhaps he was the son of a farmer, or a poor craftsman whose hands were already worn before his 13th year. But if he showed promise, strength, steadiness, patience, a master mason might take him in, not as an equal, not even as a worker, but as an apprentice, the lowest rung in a ladder that would take decades to climb. His training began with silence. Apprentices were not taught through words, but through observation, imitation, and endurance. For the first years, they swept the worksite, carried tools, and fetched water. They watched as the masters worked, memorizing every movement of the chisel, every careful strike of the mallet. The guild's wisdom was not written in books. It lived in the muscles, in the rhythm of breathing, in the whisper between hammer and stone. Each day began before dawn. The apprentices rose with the bells, ate bread so stale it could chip a tooth, and reported to the yard before the sun had even reached the rooftops. Their masters were strict, often cruel. A misplaced blow or a dull edge could earn them hours of punishment. Mistakes were not tolerated. Every error was a flaw in the cathedral itself, an insult to God. The guild demanded perfection, and perfection demanded suffering. They learned geometry before they could read. They traced circles in the dirt with bits of charcoal, drew lines, and measured angles until their fingers cramped. They learned how to lift a stone without breaking it, how to read the grain of marble, how to tell if a block would bear weight or crumble. Every cut was deliberate, every edge sacred. Even the smallest decorative pattern carried meaning, a code of faith hidden in form and proportion. For 7 years, sometimes more, an apprentice served without pay. His only reward was knowledge, and the hope that one day he might become a journeyman, free to travel from site to site, selling his skill to the highest bidder. But the journey to that point was long and uncertain. Many never made it. Some left, their hands too ruined or their spirits too broken. Others died before they could finish their training, buried in unmarked graves while the cathedral kept rising without them. Those who endured learned more than a trade. They learned discipline, the kind that turns pain into precision. They learned loyalty to their masters, to their craft, to the unseen fraternity that bound them all. And they learned secrecy, because to share the guild's knowledge with outsiders was treason. It was said that the designs of a cathedral could not be revealed to common eyes, that their geometry contained holy mysteries. Whether that was truth or myth no longer matters. What mattered was that the guilds believed it. Their silence became their shield. When an apprentice finally became a journeyman, he was allowed to travel. He carried his tools in a wooden chest and his proof of skill, a masterpiece, a single object he had created to demonstrate his worth. It might be a carved stone, a miniature arch, or a piece of tracery so delicate it looked like lace frozen in rock. He would present it before the guild's elders, who examined it with eyes sharpened by decades of scrutiny. Only when they approved did he earn his place among them. But even as a journeyman, life was uncertain. He might travel for months between towns, sleeping in barns, working for bread and a few copper coins. He lived by the strength of his back and the sharpness of his tools. Some never found a guild willing to take them as masters. They grew old wandering, forever in the shadow of buildings they helped raise but never claimed. The masters, meanwhile, were few and powerful. They held the plans, the contracts, the trust of bishops and kings. They knew the secrets of weight and balance, of divine proportion. But even they were not free. They served under the church, bound by the same fear of failure, the same devotion to the impossible. The guild did not care for fame, cared for legacy. Each generation trained the next, passing down not just techniques but values: humility before the stone, reverence before the design. The guild hall was their sanctuary. Inside, beneath wooden beams darkened by smoke, apprentices and masters gathered. They ate together, prayed together, argued about lines and angles by candlelight. They carved their emblems into the benches: compasses, squares, circles, the same symbols that would centuries later inspire the myths of secret societies. But in their time they were simply builders. Men who believed that by mastering the laws of geometry, they could glimpse the order of heaven. For the apprentice, the guild was both prison and temple. It demanded everything: his youth, his sweat, his obedience. But in return, it offered something no king could give: meaning. To belong to a guild was to be part of something eternal, something that outlived death. And for those who lived in a world ruled by famine, disease, and war, that was perhaps the closest thing to salvation. So when we stand in a cathedral today, and our eyes rise to the vaulting ceilings that seem impossibly high, we are not just seeing stone. We are seeing generations of learning, the invisible geometry passed from hand to hand, heart to heart for centuries. Every perfect arch, every carved figure, every measure of symmetry is a whisper from those long-dead guilds. A whisper that says, "We endured, we learned, and we built something that never died." There is a sound that once ruled the medieval skyline, not the chant of monks or the toll of church bells, but the rhythmic crack of iron against rock. It echoed through valleys, over rivers, across the growing towns of Europe. It was the heartbeat of creation itself, the sound of stone being born into purpose. To the men who built cathedrals, stone was not a material, it was a world. Each block was wrestled from the earth with hands, hammers, and faith. And before a single arch could rise, before a single tower could scrape the sky, that stone had to be found, shaped, and carried by men whose strength was their only tool, and whose safety depended on hope alone. The journey of a stone began in the quarry, a place where the air hung heavy with dust and the sun baked the exposed rock until it shimmered with heat. There were no machines, no engines, no ropes of steel. Just picks, wedges, and raw endurance. Men descended into pits carved by their fathers and grandfathers, working by torchlight when the days were too short. They split boulders by driving wooden pegs into cracks, soaking them with water until the swelling would force the rock apart with a sound like thunder. The method was slow, painfully slow, and one mistake could ruin an entire week's work. The heaviest blocks could weigh several tons, yet they were dragged across uneven ground on wooden sledges, often pulled by men themselves when oxen were too costly. Hundreds of laborers strained on ropes thick as their wrists, their feet slipping in mud, their backs screaming under the pull. Each movement of a stone was a battle against gravity and time. And for every triumph there was failure. A rope snapping, a block tumbling, a man crushed beneath the same stone he once shaped. There were no safety rules, no mercy in the laws of labor. When a man fell, the work did not stop. Could not. The church's deadline was eternity. At the construction site, the stones became puzzles. Every block had to fit with perfect precision, and there were no second chances. One misplaced edge could crack a wall, or worse, bring the entire structure down. To cut stone was to gamble with perfection, to dance on the thin line between strength and ruin. The masons used chisels forged by blacksmiths, simple tools that required constant sharpening. They struck thousands of times each day, listening for the sound that told them when the rock would yield. A dull blow meant wasted effort. A ringing note meant progress. The dust filled their lungs. Their hands bled. Their eyes burned from flying shards. Yet they worked on, often barefoot, often hungry. For them, the stone was not just an obstacle, it was a teacher. It demanded respect, patience, and pain in equal measure. A good mason could read it like scripture, understanding its hidden veins and the secrets of its weight. A bad one didn't last long enough to learn. The scaffolds rose higher with every passing year, wooden skeletons clinging to the sides of growing cathedrals. Workers balanced on beams barely wider than their boots, hoisting stones hundreds of feet above the ground using nothing more than pulleys and willpower. The ropes creaked like old bones. The wind screamed around the towers. One misstep, one gust, and a man could vanish in an instant, swallowed by the height he helped create. The others would pause for a heartbeat, cross themselves, then keep working. There were no funerals for those who fell. Only prayers whispered into the mortar. The weight of stone was more than physical. It was spiritual, psychological, a burden shared by everyone who lived in its shadow. The townspeople saw the masons as holy laborers, their sweat a kind of offering to God. But the masons themselves knew better. They were not saints. They were survivors. Their devotion was born not from faith alone, but from necessity, because to question the work was to question one's purpose, and in the Middle Ages, purpose was the only thing that stood between a man and despair. The builders measured progress not in months or years, but in lifetimes. Some worked decades and never saw the cathedral finished. Their sons took their places, inheriting not wealth, but tools, chisels worn smooth, hammers polished by generations of hands. Every block carried the memory of those who shaped it, a kind of silent immortality that neither poverty nor death could erase. In time, the stone would outlive them all, standing long after their names had crumbled into dust. Yet even as they built for eternity, their own lives were fragile. A collapsed wall, a falling beam, a moment's distraction, any of these could end everything. There were no doctors to tend to broken bones, no compensation for widows. The cathedral would continue to rise, absorbing the lives of those who built it like a great, indifferent beast. And still they worked, because within every stone was something greater than themselves, something they could feel, though never fully understand. Each strike of the hammer was both punishment and prayer. Each block they raised was a step closer to heaven, even if none of them would ever see its gates. When you stand before a cathedral today, and trace your hand along the cold wall, you are touching more than stone. You are touching exhaustion, sacrifice, faith. You are feeling the weight of centuries, of men who gave their bodies, their strength, and their silence to raise a dream out of dust. For them, the cathedral was not a symbol of divine perfection. It was proof that human suffering could build something eternal. And though their bones are gone, their work still stands, whispering the same truth across the ages. Every stone is heavy, but none were carried in vain. There's a moment in every cathedral's birth when the ground ceases to feel real, when the builders rise higher than the bells, and the air turns thin and cold. From below, these half-finished giants looked like stairways to heaven. But for the men who climbed them, heaven was a long way down, and the only thing waiting beneath was death. In the 13th century, when cathedrals like Chartres, Amiens, and Cologne began to pierce the clouds, scaffolding wrapped their towers like spiderwebs. Made of nothing but wood and rope, those skeletal frames groaned under the weight of stone blocks heavier than oxen. The wind never stopped. The boards shook. And yet, barefoot or in crude leather soles, men climbed. Some sang hymns to keep rhythm. Others whispered prayers to saints who were far too busy to listen. Safety harnesses didn't exist. The idea of workplace protection hadn't been born. A mason could spend years shaping the same wall, only to slip once and vanish into the air like dust. Chroniclers of the time rarely recorded names. They simply wrote, "A man fell," then silence. Another took his place the next morning. The work went on. The higher they climbed, the more the air itself seemed to turn against them. At 100 feet, the wind could roar strong enough to hurl tools off platforms. In winter, frost slicked the boards until every step became a gamble. During storms, lightning struck the cranes, primitive wooden wheels hoisted by ropes, and fire would dance down the towers, devouring months of effort in a single night. Imagine standing there, no railing, no rope, just balance and prayer, while below the square is a blur of people and carts. A slip, and you'd fall past saints carved in stone, past arches you once laid, until the world ended in a soundless crack of bones and dust. And yet men volunteered, not because they wanted to die, but because building a cathedral was the closest thing to eternity a peasant could touch. They called it God's work, but it was human hands that carried it upward, trembling hands, raw and blistered. Many workers carved tiny crosses into the stones before setting them in place, secret prayers for protection. Some kissed the blocks before lifting them. Others tied strands of hair or bits of cloth under the mortar, hoping to leave a trace of their soul in the structure. At the top of these cathedrals, the view was divine and terrifying. The builders saw entire towns stretch beneath them, smoke rising from chimneys, people no larger than insects. From that height, even the priests looked small. The masons often joked, half seriously, that they were closer to God than anyone else in the city, even if he seemed to ignore them most days. Superstition ruled their minds as much as faith. Many believed demons hid in the wind, trying to push them from the scaffolds. Some claimed to hear voices calling their names from the abyss below. A few, driven mad by height and hunger, jumped willingly, convinced angels would catch them. No one ever saw those angels. When a man did fall, work didn't stop. There were no funerals on the tower. The foreman would mutter a short prayer and order another block to be raised. The church's stones demanded sacrifice, and the builders gave it freely. "The cathedral drinks men," one chronicler wrote, "and grows strong on their bones." Still they climbed. Every rung higher meant another piece of the dream completed. They weren't just building walls, they were lifting the horizon itself. Some spent decades on a single spire, never seeing it finished. When they died, others continued. Their children and their children's children, rising into the same peril. The irony was brutal. While the church preached humility, its builders risked their lives for monuments of impossible pride. Every tower was a competition, each city racing to pierce the heavens first. Taller, grander, holier. Yet all it took was one gust of wind to remind them how small they really were. And so the masons learned a strange kind of peace with death. Each morning they faced it. Each night they thanked the saints for another breath. They grew used to the height, to the creaking boards and dizzying drops. Some even claimed to find serenity there, among the clouds and the sound of bells echoing across the valley. Up there, the noise of the world disappeared. Only the wind and the stone remained. When you stand today beneath the vaulted ceilings of Notre Dame, Chartres, or Salisbury, you can still feel it, that silent vertigo trapped in the arches. The stones remember the tremors of fear, the sweat that soaked into the mortar, the heartbeat of men who stood between heaven and earth with nothing but their faith to keep them upright. And if you listen closely when the wind howls through those ancient towers, it almost sounds like the voices of the builders, laughing, praying, daring the sky to take them again. Because for them, every cathedral wasn't just a monument to God. It was proof that even fragile, frightened men could reach for the impossible, and, for one breathless moment, touch it. If you could step into the heart of a medieval cathedral worksite, before the bells ever rang or the incense ever burned, the first thing you would hear is the sound. Not a melody, but a storm. From dawn to dusk, the air itself was alive with rhythm. The ring of metal on stone, the thud of wooden mallets, the creak of pulleys, and the groaning wheels of carts dragging limestone through the mud. Hundreds of men moved like parts of a living engine, each sound striking a note in the symphony of creation. The cathedral wasn't just built, it was sung into existence. The masons were the percussionists. Every hammer blow echoed for miles, a heartbeat of labor. They struck in tempo, sometimes even whistling as they worked, the rhythm keeping them steady through hours of repetition. Chisel against block, tap after tap, the noise rolled across valleys like the steady breathing of some giant creature waking from stone. Over them came the voices, the chants of priests or monks passing by, murmuring prayers for safety, for divine favor, for endurance. It was said that the sound of prayer could make the mortar stronger, though the masons doubted it. What truly held the cathedral together wasn't faith. It was the sound of work. The ground was never quiet. Oxen snorted under the weight of wagons. Chains rattled as cranes lifted stones skyward. The sawyers worked in pairs, pulling long saws through timbers, each motion accompanied by a low, rasping groan. The air smelled of sweat, lime dust, and the iron tang of freshly cut rock. Some called the site a forge of souls. Others said it sounded like purgatory, endless toil, endless noise, no escape but death. But to those who worked there, the clamor became comforting. Silence meant something had gone wrong. Silence meant a man had fallen. The masters of the guilds would shout over the chaos, their orders cutting through the air like whips. Apprentices answered, their voices breaking with youth. The foreman cursed, the masons sang. Above them, the wind wove through the half-built towers, carrying fragments of the noise across the countryside. A strange, holy thunder announcing that heaven was being built one blow at a time. Each group added its own layer to the music. The stonecutters worked in the quarries beyond town, where the first echoes began. Their chisels struck with a slower rhythm, deeper, more deliberate. Then came the carters, their wheels pounding the roads, hooves drumming against earth. Inside the walls, the scaffold builders hammered beams together with steady wooden thuds. And atop it all, like a shrill instrument of danger, the cranes squealed as ropes twisted under impossible weight. Even the women had their part. They cooked for the workers, their voices calling over the din, their laughter mixing with the noise of iron. Children ran between the carts, sometimes humming or clapping to the rhythm, as if the building itself had a pulse that no one could resist. When dusk came, the sounds didn't stop, they only softened. The masons dropped their tools, and the echo of the final hammer lingered in the evening air like the last note of a hymn. Smoke rose from fires as they ate in silence, their ears still ringing with the day's music. Some swore they could still hear the hammering in their dreams. Others said that after years of labor, they could never again sleep in peace without that steady rhythm beating through their minds. There was a strange beauty to it all, this orchestra of exhaustion. It wasn't harmony in the musical sense, but something older, more primal. The sound carried meaning, connection, survival. Said, "We are still here." Every strike was a defiance of weakness, every crash a declaration of belief that the impossible could be done by mortal hands. Sometimes on feast days, the workers would pause their labor. A choir of monks would gather near the foundations, and their voices would rise, pure, ethereal, untouched by dust or sweat. The contrast was staggering. Divine music against the coarse rhythm of stone. And yet somehow the two blended. Heaven and earth sang together for a moment, and every worker froze, tools in hand, heads bowed. Then the chanting would fade. The hammers would start again. The miracle would continue. Travelers often wrote about this sound, the voice of the cathedral. To them, it was as if the earth itself was speaking through the labor of men. Centuries later, when those same travelers returned to see the cathedrals finished, they swore they could still hear the worksite buried inside the walls. Every tap, every breath, every cry. And in truth, they weren't wrong. Because stone remembers vibration. Every blow leaves a trace, a microscopic tremor locked within. The walls of Notre Dame, Reims, and York Minster still hum faintly when the wind passes through them, as if the ghosts of the builders are still there, hammering away, refusing to stop. That was the real miracle of the Gothic age. Not the beauty of stained glass or the grace of flying buttresses, but the transformation of noise into eternity. What began as the sound of human struggle became sacred resonance, a music that outlived its players. If you stand inside one of these cathedrals today, at dawn when no one else is there, listen closely. Beneath the echo of your own footsteps, you'll hear it, faint, steady, unending. The whisper of chisels, the sigh of ropes, the heartbeat of those who built heaven one strike at a time. A music of devotion and exhaustion, echoing forever in stone. There were no safety rails on the towers of God. No ropes to catch a man when his foot slipped. No laws to protect him when the scaffolding cracked. For the cathedral builders of the Middle Ages, death wasn't a risk. It was part of the job. Every morning, when the bells called them to work, hundreds of men crossed themselves, not as an act of faith, but of fear. They knew that by nightfall, someone might not return. The cathedral took everything: strength, blood, and sometimes entire lives. The work sites were a labyrinth of hazards. Wooden scaffolds stretched hundreds of feet into the air, shaking with every gust of wind. Below, carts groaned under tons of limestone, their wheels deep in mud. Ropes snapped, pulleys jammed. A single mistake could turn a builder into another body laid beside the foundation stones. Falls were the most common death. The men climbed barefoot or in worn leather sandals, gripping beams slick with dust and sweat. Some said you could hear their final cry echo for seconds before it vanished into the city below. When a man fell, work stopped only long enough to carry his body aside. His blood was swept into the dirt. His tools were passed to another. They buried the dead near the site, close enough, some said, that the souls of the builders would rise with the cathedral itself. But there was no ceremony, no time. Death was expected like rain or winter. The injuries were worse than the deaths, in a way. Crushed hand meant starvation. A broken leg meant begging. There were no hospitals, no pensions, no mercy. The local apothecaries could set bones or apply leeches, but infection was almost certain. A small cut could turn black in days. A cough could mean the lungs were filling with dust, the slow drowning of the mason's disease. Every worker carried scars. Their skin was a map of burns from lime, cuts from chisels, bruises from falling stones. Their backs curved before their time, their fingers twisted from years of gripping tools. Even the youngest apprentices looked old after a few seasons. And yet they kept coming. Farmers who lost their land. Beggars who wanted purpose. Men who believed building God's house might buy them a place in heaven, or at least a meal for the day. The masters of the guilds rarely fell. They stayed below, measuring and commanding, safe among drawings and geometry. But sometimes even they were caught by fate. A cracked beam, a loosened pulley, a stray stone from above, and the master would be found broken beside his own plans. When that happened, whispers spread through the site like fire. God has judged him. There were no official counts of the dead. The church didn't keep those records. To them, the workers were hands, not names. But the cathedrals remember. Some say each tower cost 100 lives. Others say the number is higher, that every statue, every arch has a ghost bound to it. At night, after the fires went out, the silence on the site was almost unbearable. You could hear the wind moaning through unfinished windows, the faint creak of empty scaffolds. Those who kept watch swore they saw figures moving in the dark, shadows of the fallen, still working, still climbing, forever rebuilding what had crushed them. The townspeople lived with the constant echo of tragedy. When a death occurred, word spread fast. A wife would appear at the gate, barefoot, eyes hollow. Children would wait for a father who never came home. Sometimes the only thing returned was his hammer. In some cities, a strange custom emerged. When a worker died, his fellows would carve a tiny mark, a secret symbol, somewhere in the stonework, hidden from view. It was their way of remembering, their way of saying he was here. Those marks still exist today, buried deep inside the walls, invisible to visitors who gaze upward in awe, never knowing how much blood was mixed into the mortar. And still the work continued. Always. Death didn't stop a cathedral. It only delayed it. New workers replaced the fallen. Apprentices took their place on the scaffolds. The building consumed generations, and the living learned to build alongside the dead. But it wasn't just the accidents that killed them. The dust itself was deadly. Fine clouds of limestone and sand hung in the air, coating lungs and throats. Over time, masons began to cough blood. Their voices grew hoarse. They called it the white breath, a slow suffocation that left them gasping like fish. The physicians could do nothing. They prescribed wine, rest, and prayer. None of it helped. Men would return to the site anyway, coughing, spitting, swinging their hammers between fits, because missing a day meant losing pay. To die working was better than to die hungry. And so the cathedrals grew, with every injury, every funeral, every drop of sweat and blood. Some said the stones themselves drank the suffering of those who touched them. That the beauty of the cathedrals was not divine, but human, carved from agony. It's strange to think that these buildings, now symbols of peace and eternity, were once places of relentless danger. That behind every arch and angelic carving lies the story of a man who fell, or broke, or never saw the light through the stained glass he helped raise. But that's the truth of it. The builders of heaven worked in hellish conditions. Their reward was not safety or fame, but silence. A silence that swallowed names and stories, and left behind only stone. So next time you walk beneath the vaulted ceiling of a Gothic cathedral, look up. Somewhere above you, hidden in the heights, there might still be a mark, a faint carving, a single line made by a trembling hand centuries ago. A memorial to one of the countless builders who never came home. The forgotten heartbeat beneath the beauty. In the shadow of every grand cathedral stood two kinds of men, the masters and the peasants. Both were builders, but they did not live in the same world. The master mason, the architect, the visionary, might one day have his name carved into a cornerstone, remembered by kings and priests. The peasants, on the other hand, would disappear like the dust they worked in. Their sweat, their calloused hands, their broken backs, all buried beneath the same stones they raised. The master mason was the mind behind the miracle. He could read drawings, design arches that touched heaven, and speak the sacred language of geometry. His craft was a blend of science, faith, and magic. Lords and bishops looked to him with reverence, calling him Magister Operis, master of the work. He dined in halls, spoke to clergy, and was paid in gold, not grain. Yet even for him, the cathedral was a lifelong prison of responsibility. One miscalculation could bring ruin, not just to the building, but to his soul. For in the eyes of the church, failure to complete God's house was a spiritual crime. Below him, at the base of that divine hierarchy, were the countless men who followed his orders. They did not understand the geometry of heaven. They understood only the weight of stone. They carried the limestone blocks on their backs. They carved until their fingers split. They mixed mortar until their lungs filled with dust. They were peasants, laborers, slaves of devotion and hunger. No one knew their names. No one remembered their faces. If they fell from the scaffolds, the work simply continued the next morning, as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. Between the two worlds, mind and muscle, There was admiration, but never equality. The master mason needed his workers, but he did not live among them. His hands were rough, yes, but his meals were warm. He slept indoors in a bed, not on straw by the kiln. He might draw inspiration from divine visions, but the peasants found their gods in bread and ale. When the bell rang at dawn, the master gave orders. When it rang again at dusk, the peasants crawled home, too tired to speak. And in the dark, they prayed not for the cathedral's glory, but for their children to survive the winter. To the church, the difference between them was as natural as heaven and earth. The master mason was chosen, almost holy in his purpose. The peasants were his tools, part of the scaffolding of salvation. The higher the cathedral rose, the deeper their misery sank. The workers built palaces for saints, yet lived in huts of mud. Their wages barely kept them alive, and their food was coarse bread, cabbage soup, and the faint taste of beer that dulled the pain. But even hunger could not stop them. To refuse work was to risk starvation, or worse, to be replaced by another desperate soul waiting at the gate. Yet, in strange moments, the two worlds touched. When a vault was completed, when a spire finally pierced the sky, even the peasants would pause to look up, not in resentment but in awe. They had built something greater than kings. For a fleeting heartbeat, the distance between master and worker seemed to vanish. In that silence, they were both creators of something eternal. The master might have designed the plan, but the peasants had given it life. One heartbeat, one broken bone at a time. Still, history remembers only one of them. The master mason's name endures in dusty manuscripts and carved tablets. The peasants remain faceless, ghosts in the stone. Their hands shaped the walls, but their stories were never written. When we step into a medieval cathedral today and gaze at the soaring ceilings, we see divine beauty, but beneath every column lies an unmarked grave of someone who once lifted the same stone we now admire. That is the cruel irony of faith and ambition. The cathedrals were built to honor God, yet they consumed men like offerings. The masters dreamed of eternity, and the peasants gave their flesh to make it real. Each chisel mark, each block laid was a silent prayer. But for the poor, it was not a prayer of glory. It was a prayer to survive another day, to return home with both hands, to live long enough to see the sun rise again. In the end, both were trapped in the same devotion, one by pride, the other by need. The master built to reach heaven, the peasant built because hell was hunger. One carved his name into history, the other left his blood in the mortar. Together they created monuments that still stand 1,000 years later. Monuments to faith, to genius, and to suffering. Every cathedral is a sermon written in stone. But if you listen closely, beneath the hymns and echoes, you can still hear the whisper of the forgotten builders, the peasants who lived and died in the shadow of God's house, and the masters who ruled over them, never realizing how close they stood to the same dust. There is a quiet power in belief, a slow, steady force that moves people to do what reason alone cannot. In the Middle Ages, faith was not a private feeling. It was the weather of life. It touched every morning, every bread, every breath. It shaped how people understood pain, poverty, and purpose. For the men and women who raised cathedrals from the mud, faith was more than consolation. It was the very fuel that kept them climbing, hauling, and striking day after unmerciful day. Imagine a mason in the chill before dawn. The sky is still a bruise, and he polishes his chisel by the weak light of a tallow candle. His hands are rent with calluses. His back aches from last week's haul. He has little coin in his purse and a wife waiting with a thin stew. Yet when he steps onto the scaffold and looks up at the bare ribs of the building, something steady takes hold inside him. He touches the stone as if it were an altar, and in that touch, he hears a promise. The building will outlast him. The work will be seen by God. That knowledge, or that hope, alters the weight of the stone. It becomes lighter, not because of physics but because of meaning. Religion in medieval towns provided a language for suffering. Sickness, hunger, falls from scaffolds. All could be read as tests, as trials, as things that placed the sufferer closer to Christ. Penance, prayer, and labor blended into a single ethic. To suffer was to purify. Priests preached that earthly pain might translate into heavenly reward, that enduring one more season of cold or lifting one more card of stone might secure a place among the blessed. That sermon was a kind of contract. It asked nothing less than total devotion and, in return, promised a salvation that lasted beyond mortal memory. The church's influence seeped into every corner of the building site. Before a foundation was laid, a bishop blessed the ground. Masons traced crosses on their plans. Relics were carried in procession. The ritual sanctified the danger. The scaffold became sacred space for a time, and the workers sweat a holy offering. In some towns, the first stone itself was anointed with oil and incense, consecrated as if the building were already a living temple. For the laborers, these rites mattered. They gave a name to what they did and folded physical toil into cosmic purpose. Fear played the other role. In an age when damnation seemed as real as hunger, people feared the consequences of failing to do God's work. A man might worry, if I refuse the labor asked by the church, will I be marked? Will my soul be lesser? These questions were not abstract. They bore down like a hand on a man's shoulder. The social pressure to appear pious, to take part in construction as an act of devotion, was enormous. Parishes rewarded the faithful with status. Guild records note charitable donations from citizens who preferred to fund the building rather than face suspicion. Work and reputation were tangled. To step away from the scaffold could be read as an indictment of one's faith. This combination of hope and fear produced a particular kind of courage, a quiet, continued courage that was not the stuff of banners or songs. It was the kind that kept a mason returning to the same dangerous edge despite cold, injury, and grief. It gave meaning to the repetition. Chisel, strike, set. Chisel, strike, set. Over time, ritual and routine merged. A waveform formed. A day's labor followed by prayer, the lifting of stones followed by the tolling of bells. The rhythm itself became a salvific practice. You work to survive and you work to be saved. Religious festivals and saint days punctuated the labor. On certain holy days, the men paused and processed, their work cloaked in incense and chant. These moments were brief respites and, oddly, renewed the commitment. The spectacle made the men visible as holy laborers, and that recognition mattered in a world where anonymity usually swallowed the poor. People remembered the cathedral not just as art but as a communal covenant, the town's collective prayer made visible in stone. But faith as fuel had costs, could also be manipulated. Church authorities, secular lords, and master builders used pious rhetoric to secure free labor, to extract alms, to justify heavy taxes. Indulgences were sold. Promised absolution became a commodity. Sometimes the language of salvation was turned into leverage. Contribute to the tower, and your sins will be lessened. For the poor, such bargains presented a terrible arithmetic. Give your time. Give your body. Receive a hope that could not be cashed in this life. The line between devotion and exploitation blurred. Still, it would be wrong to reduce the builders to mere victims of manipulation. Many of them believed with the same intensity that had sustained their ancestors. Their faith was personal as much as institutional. A mason might carve a tiny figure into a capital at night, not because a lord demanded it, but because he felt the movement of grace in his own hands. He might whisper a saint's name and feel a measure of peace as his hammer fell. Faith granted an inner shelter where hardship could be borne a little more lightly. Over generations, this faith shaped social identity. Guilds took religious names and patron saints. Their banners displayed the very imagery the masons cut into stone. Apprentices learned not only geometry but also the hagiographies of saints whose stories modeled endurance. The culture taught that labor could be sanctified, that the secular and the sacred were porous. The cathedral, when finally complete, would not only be a house of worship but a monument to how deeply faith had been woven into everyday life. And so the builders climbed year after year, their muscles learning the rhythm of devotion. They risked their bodies because they had been taught to see meaning in sacrifice. They rose before dawn, not only for pay but for the promise that their work mattered in a story larger than their own. In their sweat and scar tissue, they left traces of a belief that made endurance possible. When we look at those great stone cathedrals now, bathed in late light and crowded with tourists, it is easy to admire the architecture and forget the faith that shaped it. Yet without that faith, that mixture of hope, fear, ritual, and community, many of those soaring windows and daring vaults would never have been attempted. The cathedral is a physical hymn, every arch a verse, every spire a chorus. Faith did not merely inspire the builders. It was the steady hand that guided them through years of hardship, the hidden fuel that turned sweat into sanctity. And in the dim hours, when the hammer stilled and the men lay down to sleep beneath the half-built stones, they would murmur prayers. Those prayers were small, private things. For strength tomorrow, for a son's survival, for the mercy of God. The cathedral rose, stone by stone, powered by this quiet machinery of belief. A human contraption of flesh and faith, lifting the world a little nearer the heavens. Winter was the enemy of stone. When the first frost touched the scaffolds, the hammer slowed. Mortar froze before it could set, ropes stiffened like iron, and the wind turned the height of the cathedral into a trap of ice and death. There came a time each year when the music of the worksite, the rhythm of chisels and the groan of pulleys, simply stopped. What remained was silence, heavy and cold, broken only by the creak of timbers and the whisper of snow gathering where sunlight once fell. For the builders, the coming of winter was not rest. It was a season of waiting, long, hungry, and uncertain. The men descended from the heights, their tools wrapped in cloth, their hands cracked from the cold. The scaffolding, bare and skeletal, loomed over empty streets, a half-built prayer frozen in time. Work stopped, but the debts did not. Wages, when they came at all, came late. Rent still demanded payment. Children still cried for bread. In the medieval world, the rhythm of life obeyed not the clock but the weather. The cathedral site, like the fields, belonged to the sun. When the snow fell, everything slowed, everything except hunger. The masons and laborers returned to cramped huts or shared lodgings, often with families too large for the space. Smoke leaked from the cracks of small hearths, and the air grew thick with the smell of damp wool and sickness. Men patched roofs, carved small pieces of wood to sell at market, or begged near the church they were building, as though seeking warmth from a faith made of stone. Some would wander, searching for work in other towns. Roads were dangerous, lined with thieves and the corpses of those who had not survived the cold. Many didn't. Those who stayed behind huddled together, trading stories of warmer days, of what the cathedral would look like when finished. Hope became its own form of currency, something to spend when bread was gone. Mothers told their children, "When spring comes, the bells will ring again." But for now, the bells were silent. Inside the cathedral, under layers of frost, the unfinished walls groaned like a living thing. Water seeped into cracks and expanded into ice, splitting stones that had taken months to place. Some years, entire sections had to be rebuilt come spring. Each winter erased a little progress. Each thaw demanded more labor. The masons cursed under their breath, but they knew this was the rhythm of their craft. Build, wait, rebuild. Faith, patience, and exhaustion became indistinguishable. For the church and the town's elites, winter was less cruel. Inside the abbeys, fires burned and wine flowed. Yet even they felt the weight of delay. Every halted project was a frozen investment. Donations had been given, oaths sworn, and yet nothing rose. The bishop would stand before the uncompleted nave and imagine the glory it was meant to be, the golden light that would one day fall through colored glass. But for now, there was only darkness and snow. Each passing winter stretched the dream further from reach. The finances of cathedral building were fragile even in good weather. Money came in bursts, from taxes, indulgences, or the generosity of nobles seeking absolution, but it left quickly. Skilled workers demanded pay. Materials had to be bought, transported, and stored. During the winter months, the flow stopped. Some builders pawned their tools for food. Others sold what little they owned. A few, too proud to beg, simply vanished into the cold, leaving only a name carved in some forgotten ledger. There was also the spiritual burden. In a world where every event was read through divine meaning, winter was a test. Priests preached that the frozen months were sent by God to humble men, to remind them of their dependence on His mercy. Yet for those who had lost family to the cold, such sermons felt hollow. Some began to whisper doubts. Why would God demand so much suffering for His house to rise? But those whispers were quickly buried under the weight of necessity. Faith could not feed the hungry, but it could make the hunger bearable. When the snow piled high around the cathedral walls, the townspeople often used the empty site as a refuge. Children played where altars would one day stand, their laughter echoing off the half-built vaults. Women gathered to pray for spring, their voices clouding in the frozen air. The structure became a strange monument, unfinished, silent, but still alive in its promise. Even in stillness, it demanded faith. Spring was always slow to return. When it finally came, the thaw brought both hope and heartbreak. Meltwater dripped through cracks, revealing damage. The wooden scaffolds, swollen with ice, sometimes collapsed in the first weeks of work. Tools rusted. The first days back were spent not building upward, but repairing what winter had undone. Yet, when the first hammer rang again, there was a kind of rebirth. Men climbed once more. The rhythm resumed. Each blow of the chisel seemed to say, "We have survived again." The years blurred into cycles. Build, freeze, rebuild, repeat. The older masons could measure their lives by the winters endured. They spoke of the cathedral as if it were a living being that slept through the cold, dreaming beneath the snow. Some even believed the building itself possessed a soul, that their prayers and labor had breathed life into the stones, and that it would awaken again when the sun returned. This belief softened the despair of waiting, gave meaning to the stillness. Yet the waiting also aged them. Each winter took something invisible, a little strength, a little faith. A man might leave the site one autumn, still strong and hopeful, and return months later older in ways he could not name. His hands stiffer, his breath shorter. The cathedral would stand exactly as he'd left it, unmoved even by time. In its silence, it reminded him of his own smallness. He would look up at the unfinished towers and wonder if he would live to see them completed. For most, the answer was no. And still they waited. Through every storm, through hunger and frost, the cathedral remained, not as a symbol of human triumph, but of human endurance. It outlasted its makers not because they were strong, but because they refused to stop believing that spring would come. In their stillness, in their patience, they built something deeper than stone. They built persistence itself. When the thaw finally came, and the first rays of light cut through the clouds to strike the frozen walls, it was like the voice of God returning. The bells, if they existed yet, rang not just for worship but for survival. The waiting had ended. The work would begin again. And so it went, year after year, century after century. The builders worked while the world slept, waited while it froze, and dreamed while it thawed, until the cathedral, born from countless winters, finally reached the sky. To build a cathedral was to build a world around it. Long before the final stones were lifted to the spire, the town below had already begun to transform. What started as a quiet medieval settlement, a few thatched roofs, a small chapel, a muddy marketplace, would within decades become a living organism of noise, commerce, faith, and desperation. The cathedral was not merely a church. It was gravity itself, pulling people, wealth, and dreams into its orbit. Every morning, before the sun reached the top of the half-built towers, the square below stirred to life. Merchants shouted over one another, their stalls brimming with grain, salted fish, and fabrics dyed in earth tones. The air carried a blend of scents: smoke, bread, sweat, manure, and the faint incense drifting from the cathedral's open nave. Somewhere, a bell tolled the hour of Mass, and the crowd paused for a heartbeat before resuming their bargaining. Building a cathedral took lifetimes, and during those lifetimes, entire generations lived and died in its shadow. Around its walls, new streets formed like veins around a heart. Inns for travelers sprang up beside the old roads. Bakers, butchers, and blacksmiths moved closer to the site, their trade tied to the steady rhythm of workers who needed tools, food, and shelter. The town became a hybrid of the sacred and the mundane, devotion at its center, survival all around it. Pilgrims were the blood that kept this heart alive. They came from distant lands, their feet blistered from weeks of walking, their clothes torn by weather and time. Some arrived in silence, others in weeping joy, all drawn by rumors of relics, of miracles, of salvation. To see a cathedral rise was to witness the proof of divine will. They believed. They carried offerings, coins, bread, sometimes a lock of hair from a dying loved one, and left them at the altar in trembling hands. For each pilgrim, the journey was a prayer written in footsteps. But not all who arrived were blessed. Alongside the pilgrims came beggars, blind, maimed, or simply starved, who lined the roads leading to the church gates. They prayed for mercy from travelers and priests alike, their pleas echoing against the scaffolds. "Alms for the poor, for the love of God," they cried, their voices a permanent part of the soundscape. For some, the cathedral was a promise of heaven. For others, it was a reminder of how far they stood from it. Artists and artisans followed too. The rising walls drew sculptors, glassmakers, and painters from across the continent. Some sought work, others inspiration. They brought with them new styles, new colors, new ways to carve the divine into stone. Towns that had once known only gray walls and simple prayers now glowed with stained glass. Scenes of saints and angels catching the morning light like living jewels. Children who had never left their village saw the world painted above them. Jerusalem, Rome, paradise. It was art as scripture, beauty as sermon. The cathedral also reshaped time itself. Its bells ruled the rhythm of every day. The call to prayer, the start and end of work, the toll for the dead. When they rang, even those who labored in the fields miles away stopped and crossed themselves. The sound reached beyond faith. It became the heartbeat of the town. Every feast, every fast, every season revolved around the church's calendar. The market rose with it, thrived with it, and sometimes fell with it. Not all were grateful for this divine order. As the cathedral's power grew, so did the church's grip on daily life. Taxes increased. Every merchant, every craftsman, every farmer was expected to give something. A portion of goods, a coin, a prayer. For some, it felt like building the house of God with their own suffering. Resentment brewed quietly, in whispers over ale and in the corners of taverns. Yet even those who cursed the bishop would still kneel when passing the construction site, fearing God's ears more than his servants. Still there was awe. Even the poorest man could stand before the half-finished facade and feel something greater than himself. The height of the arches, the complexity of the carvings, they spoke of eternity in a world where few lived past 40. On feast days, the streets turned into rivers of humanity. Merchants sold relics, some real, most fake. Children ran with candles. Musicians played lutes and flutes, their songs swallowed by the echo of bells. The whole town pulsed with celebration, as if the cathedral's shadow had turned into light. And at night, when the market emptied and the cold set in, that same shadow deepened. Thieves prowled the alleys near the worksite, stealing tools or copper scraps. The poor sought shelter under the unfinished arches, curling up among piles of stone. Their fires flickered against the carved faces of saints, making them seem alive, watching, weeping, or warning. The same building that symbolized heaven also became a refuge for those living in hell. For the builders, the town was a double-edged gift. Its growth brought food, company, and life, but also sin, temptation, and disease. Taverns filled with men who drank away their meager pay. Brothels multiplied near the edges of the market, offering comfort to those too tired to think of salvation. Priests condemned it from the pulpit, yet even they could not deny that without the noise, the trade, and the chaos, the cathedral would never rise. God's house was being built by human hands, flawed, desperate, trembling hands. As decades passed, the cathedral's presence reshaped more than streets, it reshaped minds. Generations grew up beneath its towers, measuring their own lives against the slow progress of stone. A boy might see his father lay the first foundation blocks, and his own son place the final spire. The people began to speak of themselves not as villagers, but as children of the cathedral. Their identity was no longer tied to the fields or the rivers, but to the rising monument that defined their horizon. When travelers approached from afar, the first thing they saw was not the castle or the walls, but the cathedral's silhouette cutting into the sky. To see it was to know the town existed, that it mattered. And for those who lived beneath it, that meant everything. Even if they were poor, even if they would never step beyond their gates, they belonged to something eternal. So the cathedral rose, and with it rose a civilization of faith, fear, and commerce, each feeding the other. The market below thrived on belief. The pilgrims brought coins. The workers brought life. The beggars brought a mirror of human frailty. And the cathedral, towering above them all, gathered it, the prayers, the songs, the cries, and turned it into a single unending echo that would define the town for centuries. It was not just a building. It was the heartbeat of an entire world. In the medieval world, nothing was just stone. Every shape, every line, every shadow had a meaning, spiritual, mystical, divine. To build a cathedral was to carve the language of heaven into the face of the earth. And for those who lifted those stones day after day, superstition wasn't a distraction. It was survival. The medieval builder didn't see architecture as engineering. He saw it as magic. Every wall, every arch, every tower was a prayer frozen in stone. The masons, with hands rough as rock, believed they were not just shaping blocks, but channeling something sacred. The cathedral's design followed rules that seemed mathematical, but to them, those numbers came from God Himself. Circles for eternity, triangles for the Holy Trinity, squares for the mortal world. Together, they believed, these shapes created a bridge between man and the divine. At dawn, when the first light fell across the scaffolding, builders often made the sign of the cross before touching the stone. Some whispered small blessings or left a coin hidden within the mortar, a quiet plea for protection. Others traced strange symbols, half Christian, half pagan, into the unfinished walls, warding off spirits that were said to haunt construction sites. Every blow of the hammer echoed not just in the air, but, they believed, through unseen worlds. The gargoyles, those hideous, open-mouthed creatures crouching atop the towers, terrified children and priests alike. Some said they were demons trapped in stone, placed there to scare away their own kind. Others believed they represented human sin, twisted forms of pride, lust, and envy carved into grotesque reminders. The church explained them as drains, spitting rainwater from the roof, but few believed that was their only purpose. To the masons who carved them, each gargoyle had a story. Some whispered that the creatures came alive at night, crawling along the ledges to keep watch over the sacred walls. Every cathedral was built upon layers of meaning. Beneath the floor, the crypt symbolized death, the roots of faith buried in the earth. Above it, the nave represented the body of Christ. The spire pointed toward heaven, the soul's ascent. Even the windows, those shimmering stained glass stories, were more than decoration. Their light was divine revelation, truth filtered through color. When the sun shone through, it painted the floor with living scripture, and peasants who could not read felt they were standing inside a holy vision. Yet, beneath that holiness, old beliefs lingered. The workers came from villages where nature still ruled, where forests were filled with whispers and rivers had spirits. They carried those fears into their labor. When a man died on sight, crushed beneath falling stone or slipping from the scaffolds, some believed his ghost would linger, trapped in the walls. To calm him, they buried a charm, a feather, a tooth, or a lock of his hair, inside the next block they set. It was said that to forget this ritual was to invite more deaths. Even the measurements of the cathedrals carried mystery. Builders used sacred geometry, a combination of numbers believed to hold divine power. The ratio of the nave's length to its width mirrored biblical symbolism: 7 for perfection, 12 for the apostles, 3 for the Trinity. A mistake in proportion wasn't merely an error, it was an omen. Some master masons claimed they could feel when a wall was wrong, not through the eye, but through intuition, a disturbance in the harmony between heaven and earth. For them, numbers weren't abstract. They were alive. To lay a foundation stone was to begin a prayer. To set the keystone at the top of an arch was to complete one. Each movement carried the weight of both craft and faith. They said that if a mason struck the stone with anger or pride, that spirit would remain in the wall, a hidden curse, invisible but lasting. So they prayed as they worked, sometimes to God, sometimes to something older. The church encouraged much of this symbolism, but quietly tolerated the rest. They knew superstition kept the workers obedient. It kept them building. The masons believed that if they angered God, the stones would crumble. If they worked faithfully, the walls would stand forever. And so, generation after generation, the same sacred myths passed down from father to son, hammer to hammer. As the cathedral rose higher, its meaning deepened. The towers, reaching into the clouds, became ladders to heaven, Jacob's dream in stone. The bells, cast in sacred metal and blessed before ringing, were said to drive out evil with every toll. Even the shadows cast by the architecture had purpose. When sunlight hit certain carvings on holy days, the alignment was treated as divine approval, as if heaven itself had nodded in satisfaction. But the closer they reached to the sky, the stronger their fear of what lay unseen. Many builders refused to work at the highest points without performing small rituals first. Some sprinkled holy water on the beams. Others carried relics, a saint's bone, a scrap of cloth from a monastery. They said the air up there was thinner, not just in breath but in spirit, closer to angels but also to demons. Below, townsfolk watched in awe as stone beasts and angels slowly appeared along the rising walls. They didn't see geometry or proportion. They saw mystery, a message from another world. Mothers warned their children not to point at gargoyles, lest they attract the creature's gaze. Old men swore they saw the carvings blink on stormy nights. The cathedral became not just a place of worship, but a living riddle, one that mixed salvation with superstition, beauty with fear. And perhaps that was the point. The builders themselves didn't fully understand the cathedral's secrets. They only followed the patterns handed down through centuries. Patterns said to come from Solomon's temple, from heaven, from dreams. The masons' marks carved into the hidden stones were not just signatures. They were spells of belonging, proof that their hands had touched the divine, even if no one would ever know their names. When the final gargoyle was placed, when the last stained glass window was sealed, the cathedral stood as a frozen scripture of human faith and fear. It was geometry made into prayer, superstition made into art. To walk beneath its arches was to step into the medieval mind, a world where every shadow had meaning, every sound was a sign, and every stone whispered a secret. In that age, people didn't simply build cathedrals. They tried to speak with God, and stone was their only language. In the cold shadows of unfinished cathedrals, where the echo of hammers faded between columns and scaffolds, the stonemasons left more than stacked blocks. They left secrets, tiny marks, carved initials, hidden signs etched into limestone and sandstone. No king, no bishop, no architect ever mentioned them. Yet they remained there, tucked into the heights and buried in the foundations, waiting centuries to be noticed. These builders' marks, as we call them now, were the only signatures that ordinary men could leave behind. A simple line, a curve, a three-pointed cross, each one different, but all equally silent. The mason didn't carve them for pride, but for proof. It was how his work was counted, how his day's labor was known. And perhaps, quietly, it was also how he said, "I existed." Picture it, the clang of iron on stone, the dust thick in the air, sunlight slipping through half-built windows. In a brief pause between loads, the mason pressed his chisel against the smooth surface and drew his mark. Quick, almost furtive, as if committing a small sin. Then he went back to work, cutting, lifting, sweating. Centuries later, archaeologists and restorers would find those faint lines hidden in unreachable corners, ghostly fingerprints of forgotten hands. Each mark had a practical purpose, but also something spiritual behind it. In the Middle Ages, building a cathedral was seen as serving God himself. The stone was sacred, and the mason, even if illiterate, understood that. To carve his symbol was to carve a prayer, a plea for safety, a quiet hope that his soul wouldn't be lost to the dust when his body failed under the strain. The masons were organized in guilds, secret brotherhoods that guarded their craft and codes. Within these guilds, marks were also identifiers. They were like visual passwords. An apprentice couldn't use one until his master approved it. Sometimes he inherited the mark, altering it slightly, like a family crest. Other times, he invented his own, carving his story into the cathedral's bones. In some cathedrals, the same mark appears hundreds of times. It means that one man, year after year, shaped stone after stone for the same wall, stones he'd never see assembled in the tower's dizzying height. Maybe he died before the cathedral was finished. Maybe his children never saw his face. But his mark remained, quiet, unchanging, outlasting the lives of everyone who had walked beneath it. And then there were the mysterious ones. Symbols with no clear purpose at all. Spirals, six-pointed stars, eyes, serpents, suns. Some came from pagan traditions that lingered beneath Christian devotion. The mason believed those shapes had power, to ward off evil, to protect the structure, or to keep the tower from collapsing. In the holy walls of Christendom, superstition and salvation carved their names side by side. Each mark, then, became more than a record of work. It was a whisper of rebellion, a way for invisible men to leave a trace in a world that never cared to remember them. In the grand story of kings and bishops, they were never mentioned, but they spoke anyway, through symbols carved into silence. Today, historians climb scaffolds with flashlights and brushes, hunting for those marks. They find tiny crosses beneath arches, triangles cut into the bases of columns, letters worn nearly smooth by time. Every discovery feels like a resurrection, a hand reaching through centuries of dust. For a brief moment, you can almost see him, the mason, his fingers numb from cold, carving his symbol before returning to the endless labor. There's something haunting in that. Men who lived and died anonymously, yet still found a way to say I was here. They couldn't write their names, but they carved meaning into matter. Their language was stone, their memory built into walls that still stand. Among the cathedral's splendor, the stained glass, the gold, the holy chants, what feels most human are these small, imperfect signs. They're not grand or ornate. They're just scratches, made by tired hands in fleeting moments. But they speak louder than the kings who commissioned the work. And if you ever run your fingers across one of those hidden marks, you'll feel more than stone. You'll feel the echo of a man long gone, someone who gave everything for faith, for food, or simply for purpose. His name was never recorded, but his mark endures, carved quietly into the walls of eternity. In the great hush beneath vaulted ceilings, the cathedral looks timeless, a place where prayer and stone meet and hold each other gently. But for every polished column and sunlit window, there is another story, of power quietly exercised, of belief folded into obligation, and of human labor turned into tribute. The church stood at the center of medieval life, and its influence reached into every hearth and field. What began as spiritual authority sometimes became something much more practical, an enormous engine of wealth and prestige that depended, in large part, on the same hands that raised the stones. Imagine the bishop's house across the square, warm and lit, its tapestries bright. From that house, decisions were made about the cathedral, which sculptor to hire, which relic to acquire, which feast to celebrate with gold and ceremony. Money came from many places, gifts from nobles seeking remembrance, tithes collected from the poor, indulgences sold or granted, and rents on lands the church controlled. The cathedral was both a spiritual center and a financial enterprise. It needed funds, for glass, for lead, for silver, and those funds had to come from somewhere. Often they came from the very people whose backs bent beneath the weight of the work. Tithes were one of the quietest forms of extraction. A tenth of a farmer's crop, a tenth of a miller's flour, a tenth of a shepherd's lamb, all pledged to sustain a clergy and a church that, in turn, promised spiritual care. For the prosperous, a tithe might be a manageable offering. For the poor, it was a burden. The tithe system legitimized poverty as part of the social order. Give up food so the bell can ring and the altar can burn with incense. People gave because they believed, and because the alternative, resistance, risked both social censure and ecclesiastical wrath. There were other, more direct demands. Corvée labor, unpaid days of work owed to lords and in many places to churches, could be required from peasants. A family might have to supply a man to haul stone for the cathedral for weeks each season, not because that man chose the work, but because it was decreed. The labor was framed as service to God, and yet its immediate beneficiaries were institutions and patrons who built status as much as sanctuaries. The language of piety smoothed over the mechanics of extraction. Devotion became a duty, and duty could be taxed in muscle as well as coin. Indulgences and donations were another complex thread. The church taught that giving could mitigate sin and shorten time in purgatory. Preachers and bishops, sometimes sincerely, sometimes opportunistically, reminded people that gifts could ensure spiritual safety for themselves and their kin. Generosity at the door of a cathedral might be accompanied by a blessing. Behind the altar, that same generosity enabled the gilding of a choir stall, the hiring of more clerks, or the enlargement of a bishop's household. The promise of spiritual return made the transaction feel less like loss and more like investment, but the result was often the same. The poor paid in hope, and the rich paid in spectacle. Relics played a surprising part in this web. To possess a saint's bone, a piece of cloth, or a claimed shard of a holy object was to draw pilgrims, and pilgrims brought money. Towns competed to secure relics precisely because they brought visitors, trade, inns, and coin. A relic could turn a dusty village into a prosperous stopping point on a pilgrimage route. So the acquisition, display, and promotion of relics became an economic as well as spiritual strategy. The faithful believed in the relic's power. The administrators knew their economic value. Faith and revenue became entangled, each feeding the other. The masters and architects who designed and supervised cathedral building were often enlisted in this prestige economy. A magnificent facade, a towering spire, an elaborate carved portal. These were not merely acts of devotion, they were public statements. Bishops wanted a cathedral that would be remembered, that would draw visitors and affirm their place in the social order. Wealth funded ornament. Ornament attracted attention. Attention affirmed authority. The labor of the poor, then, produced not only a house of worship but a monument to rank and power. Guilds and church officials sometimes cooperated, sometimes colluded. Guilds provided skilled labor and organizational structure, but they also relied on commissions that favored certain workshops, families, and towns. Contracts could privilege certain masters or routes for materials, concentrating profit in particular hands. Meanwhile, the church's control over law, marriage, and moral life made it difficult for laborers to dissent. If a man refused to work, he risked being accused of poor Christian charity. If he withheld a tithe, the community might view him as selfish or cursed. The social pressures were subtle but relentless. Charity, however, remained part of the picture, complicated and real. Monasteries fed the poor, and cathedrals offered hospitals and refuge in some seasons. There were genuine acts of compassion carried out under ecclesiastical auspices. Yet charity could also be performative. Almsgiving recorded in a donor's book, a plaque commemorating a benefactor's generosity, prayers said publicly in exchange for a gift. The pious public acts of giving were both sincere and social, ways to secure memory and status. So the line between compassion and display blurred. For many of the workers, the moral calculus was personal and immediate. When a child was sick, a mason might pawn tools to buy medicine. When winter threatened, a family might sell jewelry to buy flour. The cathedral's splendor did not put bread on the table. Yet the same mason might still kneel at the altar and pray for the building's success, for his portion in an afterlife measured in proximity to the sacred. It is a small, painful paradox. Faith sustained people's courage and endurance, while the institutional structures of faith often benefited others more than those who labored. Power also took the shape of legal and political authority. Bishops sat in councils, negotiated with lords, and sometimes levied fines. They could command courts that enforced moral behavior, and they often controlled lands with tenant labor. The church's reach into legal and fiscal life meant that its interests were not only spiritual. Cathedral construction, then, became partly a political act, a visible claim to territory, resources, and influence. The very stones of a cathedral could mark a diocese's strength, its alliances, and its ambitions. And yet, the picture is never wholly dark. Many clergy were devout, hard-working, and genuinely committed to the welfare of their communities. There were charitable priests, humble bishops, and generous patrons who used their wealth to relieve suffering. The same institution that sometimes extracted also provided education, care for the sick, and a repository of knowledge. The contradiction is human. Institutions reflect both the virtues and the vices of the people who run them. For those who toiled beneath the scaffolds, the cathedral was a paradoxical mirror. It reflected their faith and their exploitation in equal measure. They lifted stones for God and for power, for salvation and for status. They sang hymns as carts rushed past with stone for a facade that would announce the bishop's prestige. Their labor created beauty, and that beauty became the banner under which power marched. When you stand now in the shade of a great nave, watching light fall through centuries-old glass, it is easy to be seduced by beauty alone. But if you listen quietly, the building also speaks of other things. The bargains made in vestries and halls, the tithes and indulgences, the seasonal demands for unpaid labor, and the economies of pilgrimage. It remembers both generosity and extraction. And in that remembering, there is a tender, sorrowful truth. The cathedrals belong to all who touch them. They are monuments of prayer and monuments of human cost. Their stones carry the weight not only of heavenward aspiration but of complicated human choices. The bells that ring now for weddings and feasts once also tolled over men who salted the earth with their sweat. The glory gleams, but the shadow remains, and both live together in the quiet breath of stone. So the work continued. Prayers and ledgers, hymns and contracts, altar and account book, each day folding faith into the routines of survival. And when at last the builders rested, their families kept watch, and the cathedral rose. It did so as though stitched from contradiction, a house of God, and also a ledger of human striving. In the hush that follows, the stones remember both. In the chronicles of cathedral building, women are barely mentioned. Their names rarely appear in guild records or on the stones they helped shape. Yet, if one looks closely between the pages of contracts, at the edges of the scaffolds, or in the villages surrounding the rising walls, the faint outlines of their presence emerge. Women were there, not in the grand ledgers or among the celebrated masters, but in the quieter rhythms that made the impossible work of building cathedrals actually happen. They lived on the margins of the miracle, shaping it in ways history almost forgot. At dawn, when the bells rang to call the workers, women were already awake. Some carried baskets of bread and thin ale to the worksite, selling food to the men who would spend the day lifting, carving, or dying under the weight of stone. Others washed the linen used to wipe sweat and blood from the laborers' hands. They cooked, patched clothes, mended ropes, and nursed the injured. Their work did not appear in the architect's plans, but without it, the work would have slowed, maybe even stopped. In every cathedral town, a shadow economy of women sustained the labor that history ascribed to men. Some women worked closer to the walls themselves. Widows, too poor to remarry, sometimes hauled lime and sand, mixing mortar for pennies a day. In rare cases, they joined the ranks of unskilled laborers, carrying stones, fetching water, or sweeping dust from the scaffolds. Their pay was lower than that of men, and their safety more precarious. But for some there was no other choice. The cathedral, vast and consuming, drew the desperate to its orbit. Where the church saw sacred work, many women saw survival. There were also women who served the builders indirectly, brewing ale, baking bread, cleaning lodgings. Taverns and alehouses near construction sites became gathering places, run mostly by widows or wives of workers. These women heard the stories of crushed hands and broken backs, of faith and fatigue. They offered drink and warmth, sometimes comfort, sometimes companionship. Their earnings were uncertain, their respectability questioned, yet they occupied a space essential to the community's fragile balance. For every mason who carved an angel, there was likely a woman who kept him alive long enough to finish it. In some cathedral towns, women joined the religious orders that grew alongside the great churches. Nuns cared for the sick and dying in hospitals funded by donations to the cathedral. Others embroidered vestments or prepared candles for the altar. Their hands, though unseen, helped shape the rituals that gave meaning to the soaring stone. For them, devotion and labor were indistinguishable. Each stitch, each prayer, an offering to a god they served from behind walls that often confined them as tightly as cloisters. There were women artisans too, though their names were rarely recorded. The wives and daughters of masons sometimes learned the trade by proximity, helping to draw patterns, carry tools, or even carve small decorative elements under their husband's supervision. Guild rules forbade female membership, but that did not erase skill. When a mason died, his widow might complete a contract in his name to feed her children. Some guilds allowed this as a formality, others quietly ignored it. The result is a ghostly legacy, anonymous hands finishing what death interrupted. Beyond the towns, women bore the weight of absence. Husbands and sons left for seasons or years to work on cathedrals miles away. The women stayed, tending fields, raising children, keeping homes intact while the men labored for God and for wages they might never bring home. When the church preached patience and obedience, it often did so to women left alone with hunger. Their endurance, silent, unrecorded, was the scaffolding beneath the scaffolding. For those who lived closest to the cathedral, life unfolded under the shadow of grandeur. They watched the walls rise while their own roofs leaked. They heard the bells toll for Mass while they sold bread in the cold. The cathedral promised salvation, but salvation was slow, and hunger came daily. Yet even they believed. When the windows glowed with colored light, some women crossed themselves and whispered prayers for the men inside. The faith that built the cathedral also built them into survivors. There were darker corners too. The proximity of so many men, money, and exhaustion bred vice as much as virtue. Around some worksites, prostitution flourished, tolerated by overseers who needed the workers docile and the towns prosperous. For many of these women, survival came at the cost of their bodies and their reputation. The church that built the great houses of God often turned away from them, preaching purity while profiting from the commerce their presence sustained. Their stories ended in silence, buried beneath the same stones that lifted prayers to heaven. Yet not all women near the cathedral were powerless. Some wielded quiet influence. Wives of foremen or merchants who supplied stone and timber, widows who owned inns where deals were struck. Their wealth was limited, but their voices mattered. They maneuvered within a society that gave them little space to speak, turning necessity into strategy. Their survival was not rebellion but a form of mastery within constraint. In art and sculpture, women appeared everywhere. Saints, sinners, queens, and mothers. Their carved faces looked down from portals, frozen in expressions of piety or despair. Most of these figures were designed by men, but they were inspired by the women those men saw. The weary, the devout, the demanding, the kind. The stone Madonnas and kneeling donors immortalized ideals, while the real women who mixed the mortar and mended the clothes vanished unrecorded. The irony is sharp. Women became symbols of divine purity, even as their earthly labor was forgotten. Still traces remain. A name scrawled in a ledger. A fragment of fabric embroidered by a nun. A legend about a mason's widow who finished a carving in secret. History left them few words, but the silence itself tells a story. It speaks of a society where the sacred and the invisible were often the same thing. The cathedral was built to reach heaven, but it also cast long shadows, and in those shadows, women worked, waited, and endured. When the great doors finally opened and the towns gathered to marvel, many of those women were gone. Some had died, some had moved on, some simply faded from record. The men who survived took their places in the procession, proud and solemn, their names etched in memory or stone. But the echo of those who lived on the margins remained soft, persistent, human. The faint smell of bread, the quiet murmur of prayer, the hands that patched robes and soothed fevered skin. In the end, the cathedrals were not only built by the men whose names we know, but by the women whose names were never spoken. Their lives filled the spaces between the stones. Their strength fed the workers, their silence shaped the story. And though history does not sing their names, the walls they helped sustain still rise, immense, eternal, and heavy with the breath of those who stood forever in their shadow. Time in the life of a cathedral builder moved differently than in the world beyond the walls. Days passed slowly, measured by the rising and setting of the sun, by the sound of hammers striking stone, by the creak of pulleys lifting blocks of limestone or granite. Weeks blurred into months, months into years, and years into decades. Many who began as young apprentices would grow old before ever seeing the masterpiece for which they labored. The scaffolds, high and perilous, became their constant companions, stretching toward heaven yet never arriving, a persistent reminder of unfinished work and deferred glory. For the ordinary laborer, life was a cycle of repetition. He awoke with dawn, walked past the same half-built walls, and felt the weight of tools in his hands that had never felt lighter over time. Every swing of the hammer, every cut of the chisel, was a small advance toward something monumental, but progress was measured in inches, not the mind's conception of the final cathedral. Scaffolds rose and fell as new generations of masons replaced the old. Yet the horizon of completion remained just beyond reach. The builders witnessed a world in flux. Kings died, towns grew, rivers shifted course, yet the stone remained unfinished, an eternal project consuming human lifetimes. The passage of time was visible not only in the scaffolds, but in the faces of those who worked them. Apprentices with bright eyes and nimble hands eventually wore the lines of fatigue on their brows. Their hands, once smooth, became calloused, fingers gnarled, joints stiff from decades of repetitive labor. The young men who carried mortar and stones would see their bodies bend and stoop, their legs tremble as they climbed ladders that had once seemed simple. Many laborers never survived the decades required to see even the smallest spire completed. Those who did carried with them not triumph but a quiet resignation, the knowledge that their own lives were as much a measure of time as the cathedral itself. Generations passed beneath the same arches. Fathers worked alongside sons, teaching them the trade, passing on secrets of stone cutting, carving, and structural knowledge. Yet in a cruel symmetry, many fathers died before their children could complete what they had begun, leaving the young men to continue, guided by half-remembered lessons and the faint trace of a father's chisel marks. The scaffolds, patched and rebuilt countless times, became both symbol and prison, marking the relentless march of time while offering no sense of completion. In such a world, the concept of finishing a cathedral was almost mythical. The work was meant to span lifetimes, and so it did. Seasons marked the passing of years as well. Winters brought cold and hunger, halting work for months. Builders huddled under tents or makeshift shelters, their breath fogging the air as they waited for the thaw. Summers, long and oppressive, burned the skin beneath the sun, leaving men with sunburned necks and blistered hands. Spring and autumn offered brief relief, yet they were fleeting, measured only by the rhythm of stone and mortar. The passing of seasons mirrored the passing of generations, each one caught in the same cycle of toil, with scaffolds rising just a little higher with each year, yet never reaching the sky in the span of a single life. In the shadows of scaffolds, one could see the weight of time etched into every corner. The unfinished arches loomed over the streets, a constant reminder of human perseverance and human fragility. Craftsmen who began as hopeful apprentices would age alongside the stone, their youthful vigor replaced by aching muscles, stiff joints, and a mind trained to repetition. Some would develop a slow, meditative understanding of the stone itself, recognizing the grain, the hardness, the way it could be coaxed into shape. Others, however, would grow weary, haunted by the knowledge that all their effort might be consumed by time, leaving no witness to their labor beyond their own memory. The passing of time also affected the communities around the cathedral. Towns grew in the shadow of the scaffolds. Markets, roads, and houses shifted as new generations were born and others passed away. Children who had watched the scaffold rise over the roofs of their homes grew into adults themselves, sometimes joining the workforce, sometimes leaving for other trades. The cathedral, meanwhile, remained in perpetual construction, a constant presence, witnessing the lives of those who would never see it finished. In this way, the building itself became a silent recorder of human existence, marking decades with every block laid, every chisel mark struck, every rope stretched across the sky. Yet within the slow rhythm of decades, there was a quiet meditation, a solemn understanding that the work itself was as sacred as the finished dream. Builders learned to measure their lives not by completed structures but by the labor itself. Each day's toil was an act of devotion, an offering of strength and endurance to God. In the silence of the scaffold, with only the wind whistling through half-finished arches, the men and women who labored came to understand that their work connected them to something larger than themselves. It was not the finished cathedral that mattered as much as the act of building, generation after generation, year after year. Ultimately, The passing of time in cathedral construction became a testament to human patience, perseverance, and humility. Few lived to see the final spire, the completed nave, or the great stained glass windows. Those who did may have felt awe, but they also carried the memory of decades spent beneath scaffolds, hands calloused, bodies worn, and spirits tempered by repetition. Time left its mark not only on the cathedral but on those who labored for it, shaping their lives into patterns of endurance, devotion, and quiet resignation. The unfinished scaffolds, ever climbing toward the heavens, became monuments not only to faith but to human endurance, silent witnesses to lifetimes of effort, sacrifice, and the slow, inexorable passage of time itself. For countless generations, the dream of completing a cathedral stretched far beyond the lifespans of the men and women who labored for it. What began as a spark of faith, a vision etched into plans and stone, often extended over decades and centuries, leaving scaffolds ever rising, arches only half formed, and spires that never kissed the sky. Builders devoted their lives to these monumental projects, yet for most, the final moment of triumph, the completion of the nave, the finishing of a stained glass window, the final polish on an intricate arch, remained forever out of reach. The cathedral became a paradox, a symbol of human devotion and divine aspiration, but also a silent testament to the futility of a life measured against centuries. Each stone laid carried not only the weight of physical labor but also the weight of time itself. Apprentices learned their craft alongside seasoned masons, observing and mimicking the precise cuts of chisel and hammer. Yet, even as generations succeeded one another, the cathedral grew slowly, almost imperceptibly. Fathers instructed sons who became fathers themselves, while the original architects and planners aged, often passing away before seeing their vision fully realized. In this way, the dream of completion remained just that, a dream, a distant horizon toward which countless lives were devoted but which no single life could ever fully grasp. The unfinished cathedral loomed over the towns and villages that had grown around it. Markets, homes, and streets were planned with the rising walls as a backdrop, and communities adapted to the scaffolds and cranes that dominated the skyline. Visitors and pilgrims marveled at the structure's enormity, yet they also witnessed the incompleteness, the empty niches, the exposed beams, the half-carved statues awaiting hands that might never return. The work became a living record of human endurance, patience, and often disappointment. It was a constant reminder that even faith itself, so meticulously devoted, could not always bend the limitations of time. There was a strange rhythm to life in the shadow of an unfinished cathedral. Workers rose with the sun, their mornings filled with the steady rhythm of hammers, chisels, and hoists. Days ended with the fading light casting long shadows over partially completed walls. Nights were spent in contemplation of the same scaffolds, the same half-finished stone, and the same long stretches of work yet to be done. Each day repeated itself, each season cycled through, and each generation left its mark, yet the structure remained incomplete, a monument to persistence, but also to the inevitability of impermanence. The builders themselves came to understand that the cathedral's life exceeded their own, and that their role was as much about sustaining the work as about seeing its completion. The futility of this endeavor was felt not only physically but emotionally. Builders developed a complex relationship with the stone, the tools, and the endless task. Some took comfort in the continuity of their work, seeing in each stone laid a reflection of faith, devotion, and the shared labor of humanity. Others were haunted by the knowledge that their efforts might never be seen in their final form, that the cathedral would remain a skeleton of its intended grandeur for centuries, awaiting hands that would never arrive. In this tension between devotion and futility, life itself became entwined with the rhythm of construction, a slow march alongside walls that would outlive every individual who touched them. Yet, in the incompleteness lay a peculiar kind of beauty. Unfinished cathedrals carry the stories of all who labored upon them. Every exposed arch and incomplete facade speaks to generations of hands, minds, and hearts committed to something greater than themselves. Apprentices became masters without ever witnessing the final product. Their names often lost to time, but their work immortalized in the partially carved stone. The incomplete windows allowed light to filter unevenly, casting shadows that shifted with the sun, adding a sense of living imperfection to the grand design. The cathedral, though unfinished, remained magnificent in its ambition and testament to human endeavor. Communities adapted to the incomplete structures, embedding the cathedrals into daily life, treating the scaffolds and half-finished spires as part of their environment. The ongoing construction provided work for generations, sustenance for families, and a sense of continuity across decades. Yet, it also became a silent reminder of mortality, of lives spent devoted to a vision that no single generation could fully achieve. Children grew up playing in the shadow of half-built arches. Elders watched scaffolds rise year after year, understanding that their work would likely remain uncompleted, leaving them with a lifetime of effort as witness to only part of the dream. The incompletion also reflected the broader limits of medieval society, the limits of manpower, resources, and technology. Grand cathedrals required enormous amounts of stone, wood, and labor. Wars, famine, and disease often interrupted construction, leaving structures paused for years or decades. Financial strains delayed work, while the unpredictability of political and religious priorities shifted the pace of construction. In this sense, every unfinished cathedral tells not only the story of individual builders, but also the story of the society that struggled to sustain such monumental ambition. Each incomplete structure is a record of hope, perseverance, and the harsh realities of the medieval world. Ultimately, the completion that never came became a meditation on human endeavor and time itself. Builders came and went, generations rose and fell, yet the scaffolds remained, ever climbing, ever reaching, and ever incomplete. These cathedrals, while unfinished, still command awe and respect. They are monuments to ambition, devotion, and the willingness of countless individuals to dedicate their lives to something beyond themselves. They remind us that human work is not always about the end result, but about the journey, the labor, and the continuity of effort across time and generations. In every incomplete spire, every half-carved arch, there is the echo of countless lives spent in devotion, a quiet acknowledgement that even unfinished dreams carry profound beauty and meaning. Even after centuries, the cathedrals that rose from the hands of countless laborers stand as silent witnesses to human perseverance, ambition, and the immense cost of devotion. Each massive wall, each intricately carved arch, and every partially completed spire tells the story of generations who dedicated their lives to a singular vision. These monumental structures were more than places of worship. They were the culmination of countless hours of grueling labor, carried out by men and women who often toiled in extreme conditions, braving heights, weather, and physical exhaustion, all in the hope of leaving something lasting behind. The stone itself became a record of suffering, a permanent archive of hands worn raw, muscles strained, and dreams deferred across decades, sometimes centuries. The legacy is multifaceted. On one level, It represents human endurance in the face of immense challenges. Workers faced not only the weight of the stone and the unpredictability of construction, but also the limits imposed by time, illness, and mortality. Many of those who began these edifices never lived to see their completion, yet their labor forms the backbone of structures that continue to inspire awe. On another level, the cathedrals bear witness to the suffering endured by ordinary laborers, apprentices, and masons whose names have largely vanished from history. Their contributions, while uncelebrated individually, collectively created some of the most enduring and magnificent monuments of the medieval world. Walking through a cathedral today, it is easy to be overwhelmed by its grandeur and beauty. The soaring ceilings, the colorful stained glass, and the symmetry of arches all convey an impression of perfection and divine inspiration. Yet, for those who built them, perfection was an elusive goal. Each stone represented not just a building block but a story of physical toil, human ingenuity, and relentless perseverance. Apprentices learned the craft under the watchful eyes of masters, often spending years perfecting a single skill. Day after day, year after year, they faced the repetitive strain of chiseling, lifting, and hoisting, knowing that their contributions might never be fully appreciated or even seen in the completed structure. This awareness of labor's impermanence added a quiet poignancy to every effort, every strike of the hammer, and every careful placement of stone. The aesthetic beauty of these cathedrals cannot be separated from the human cost of their construction. Gargoyles, carved statues, and the delicate tracery of windows reflect not only artistic vision but also countless hours of patient labor. Each curve, each delicate detail, was carved by hands that endured blisters, cuts, and exhaustion. The rhythmic hammering, the scrape of chisels, and the creaking of scaffolds echo through history, reminding us that behind every architectural flourish lay the steady, often painful, work of human bodies and minds. In this way, the cathedrals are as much monuments to suffering as they are to faith, combining devotion, endurance, and resilience into a single, enduring legacy. The enduring presence of these cathedrals in the towns and cities of Europe also speaks to the impact of their builders on community life. Towns grew around these massive structures. Economies adjusted to support the constant flow of laborers and materials, and generations were raised in the shadow of walls that seemed to stretch forever. For centuries, people lived, worked, and worshipped within sight of these grand constructions, their lives intertwined with the progress and setbacks of the building project. The scaffolds, cranes, and tools were a constant presence, shaping not only the skyline but also the rhythms and routines of daily life. Even the unfinished elements of many cathedrals contribute to their legacy. The incompleteness of certain spires, arches, or facades serves as a reminder of the limits of human endeavor and the relentless passage of time. While some portions of a cathedral may stand in perfect form, others remain half-carved or suspended in scaffolding, hinting at centuries of work that were never fully realized. These incomplete areas invite contemplation of the countless lives that contributed to the structure, offering insight into the endurance required to attempt such monumental feats. They reveal the reality that human labor is both powerful and fragile, capable of creating beauty that transcends generations, yet always bounded by mortality and circumstance. In reflecting on the legacy of medieval cathedral builders, it is impossible to separate the physical structures from the stories of those who created them. The cathedrals are silent witnesses to centuries of labor, pain, and unwavering commitment. They embody the intersection of human aspiration and limitation, faith and endurance, suffering and triumph. Standing beneath the soaring arches today, one can almost hear the echoes of chisels striking stone, the creak of wooden scaffolds, and the collective breath of generations of workers who gave everything to something larger than themselves. Ultimately, these cathedrals remain lasting symbols of what humans can achieve through relentless effort and devotion, but they are also poignant reminders of the sacrifices required to achieve such feats. Each stone, each carving, and each partially completed element tells a story of lives devoted to labor, of skill honed through hardship, and of a vision that reached far beyond the lifetime of any individual worker. The legacy in stone is therefore twofold. It celebrates human creativity, endurance, and faith, while also silently honoring the countless unseen hands whose lives were consumed in the pursuit of monumental beauty. In this duality, the medieval cathedrals endure not just as religious or architectural marvels, but as monuments to human perseverance and the profound cost of ambition, standing through centuries as eternal testaments to the endurance and suffering of those who built them. As the final stones of the cathedral were set into place, and the echoes of hammering faded into distant memory, the truth of what had been accomplished became quietly apparent. The grandeur of the soaring arches, the delicate tracery of the windows, and the light cascading through stained glass were the result of countless hands, blistered and worn, laboring under harsh sun, biting wind, and unrelenting toil. Each curve and contour of stone, each lofty spire reaching toward the heavens, was a monument not only to faith and devotion, but to human suffering, endurance, and persistence across decades, sometimes centuries. The beauty that fills the eyes of those who gaze upon these cathedrals masks the often invisible pain and exhaustion that brought them into existence. The laborers, apprentices, and masons who devoted their lives to this monumental work experienced hardships that few today can imagine. They faced the weight of stone on their shoulders, the instability of towering scaffolds hundreds of feet above ground, and the ever-present threat of injury or death. Winter brought bitter cold that seeped through thin garments. Summer offered little relief as the sun beat down on the workers, turning the stone into ovens and the tools into extensions of their own strained muscles. Yet, day after day, year after year, they continued, driven by faith, obligation, necessity, or the hope of leaving something lasting behind. Each swing of the hammer and careful placement of stone carried the weight of a vision larger than life, yet exacted a personal toll that history often forgets. While architects and church leaders were celebrated, and kings and nobles could bask in the glory of the finished structure, the workers remained largely unseen. Their lives were measured not in recognition or reward, but in the daily grind, in the calloused palms, in the quiet endurance required to sustain the work. Many grew old seeing only scaffolds and half-finished arches, never knowing if their efforts would reach completion within their lifetimes. Generations passed, each contributing their labor to a structure that would outlive them, their names erased from the narrative, yet their presence forever etched into the very fabric of the cathedral. The quiet truth behind these architectural marvels is one of paradox. On one hand, there is awe-inspiring beauty, an almost miraculous testament to human creativity and ambition. On the other hand, there is a profound acknowledgement of the human cost, the broken hands, sore backs, and weary bodies that built the foundation of heaven in stone. Every gargoyle, every carving, every towering arch carries the imprint of lives lived in perseverance, often against great odds, and often in near anonymity. The cathedrals stand as both monuments to devotion and memorials to the laborers who gave everything to something greater than themselves. Reflecting upon this legacy invites a slow, meditative acknowledgement of human endurance. There is a rhythm to the labor, a cadence to the chisels and hammers, a subtle music in the grunts and groans of effort that echoes through time. It is a music that speaks of quiet suffering, of endless repetition, of the steady, almost imperceptible passage of days marked by toil. In this rhythm, there is a strange comfort, a reminder that even in suffering there is purpose, and even in anonymity there is contribution. The cathedrals whisper stories not only of divine aspiration but of human resilience, of patience stretched across decades, and of the intimate connection between work, sacrifice, and enduring legacy. In the shadow of these immense structures, one can imagine the lives of the builders, their fleeting moments of rest, the rare instances of laughter, the camaraderie born of shared struggle, and the silent resignation to a life measured in stone and mortar. There is a somber beauty in this quiet endurance, a reminder that monumental achievements are rarely born of comfort or ease, but of persistent, sometimes painful effort. The towers that seem to touch the heavens are supported by hands that knew hardship, and the arches that lift toward the sky are framed by the resilience of countless souls who labored without recognition. As the sun sets over the cathedral, casting long shadows across the square, and the last light illuminates the intricate stonework, there is a gentle invitation to reflect, to breathe slowly, and to let the mind settle. The story of the builders is not one of triumph alone, but of human perseverance interwoven with suffering. It is a narrative that unfolds gradually, almost imperceptibly, much like the construction itself. Each day adding a small piece to a grand vision, each life a silent thread in the tapestry of time. Let the mind drift through the vaulted ceilings and narrow passageways, feeling the weight of stone, the echo of hammers, and the whisper of history. Let the quiet rhythm of effort, endurance, and the passage of generations guide the thoughts toward stillness. Here, in this meditative space, the grandeur of human ambition meets the tenderness of human fragility, and the recognition that even the most magnificent works of beauty are built on sweat, perseverance, and the unacknowledged labor of countless lives. And so, as the cathedral stands in all its silent splendor, the story gently winds down. The hands that toiled, the backs that bent, the lives given to the vision, they linger in the stone itself. Heaven, it seems, was indeed built on broken hands, yet within that truth lies a quiet meditation on the enduring power of human effort, a slow, reflective journey that carries the mind gently into rest.